I'm Owen Gleiberman, Chief Film Critic for Variety.
I'm Peter DeBruge, Chief Film Critic for Variety.
This is my 10 Best of the Decade list.
I've chosen my top 10 films of the decade.
This is such a fun list to compile because it's the movies you love so much that I feel like I don't even choose them. They're the films that choose me.
I have a couple movies from Fox Searchlight on my list. 12 Years a Slave, which won the Best Picture Oscar, and also Beasts of the Southern Wild. And I think that it's a reminder that companies like Searchlight and also A24, which released Waves, have really been bringing a new vitality to the American independent film scene. 12 Years a Slave, of course, addresses the subject of slavery, which, as important as any subject is in cinema, slavery feels like the great unanswered, unreconciled wound in America's past. And this, for me, is the film that really confronts it head on with a seriousness and an honesty that refuses to be ignored.
My number 9 film of the decade is Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. A popcorn movie. I think it's the greatest film in the series. Certainly the scenes with Tom Cruise on the tallest building in the world in Dubai, like a real-life Spider-Man with those electric suction cups, doing his own stunts, really being on that building. That was one of the most spectacular action sequences I'd ever seen. I find the whole plot, the whole layered trickiness of it, the whole illusion and reality aspect to be so seductive and enticing. I can watch the movie again and again. I think it is the apotheosis of a certain kind of Hollywood escapist filmmaking, done on such a high level by director Brad Bird that it becomes a kind of art.
Who's this?
That's Apollo.
Wow, that's amazing. A horse that never had nobody on his back before.
I can't tell you enough how much I love The Rider, Chloe Zhao's movie set on a Native American reservation, in which we see sort of what happened to the conflict between cowboys and Indians. In the 100 years since, the Indians have become the cowboys. It's about a Native American rodeo rider who falls off his horse and suffers an injury so major that he can't ever ride a horse again, or at least that's what his doctor tells him. Then what do? It really focuses on how someone picks up and redirects their dream. And this movie is told with such a rich, poetic, and realistic tone. I think it's absolutely one of the standouts.
I'm engaged. Oh my God! He asked me last night. What is happening?
Bridesmaids, my number 6 film, is hands down the comedy of the decade. I mean, it's spectacularly funny. It's not just a movie about friendship or the idea that women can be as raunchy as men. Bridesmaids is about that gnawing feeling that, you know, you're not one of the elite. And there's just a fantastic comedy that grows out of that. I also think it's not a coincidence that the great comedy of our time is a woman's story. I mean, we've had male comedies from every angle, and women now telling their stories. It's just newer, fresher, and more spectacularly funny.
Amor is a film by Michael Haneke, who is, for me, the most interesting international filmmaker working today. Until Amor, he had been making these really confrontational movies like The Piano Teacher, Cachet. With Amor, he softens up a little bit and looks at a relationship at the end of a long lifetime together. It's, again, another really heavy subject treated with a seriousness that only, I think, Haneke's sort of touch can bring. And he too has had an enormous influence on almost the next 8 years worth of filmmaking that's followed.
What a lovely day!
My number 3 movie is Mad Max: Fury Road. You know, in the 1980s, I became possessed by the way that these films weren't just about speed and ferocity, but almost a landscape where God had left the building. These just totally nihilistic, existential films. But then when I saw Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, it really wasn't the part 3 that those first 2 movies deserved. But Mad Max Fury Road, coming decades later, is. George Miller finally delivered the 3rd film in this series that we wanted to see, that really brought it into the 21st century. What he does with Speed is amazing. Your eye almost has to learn to watch this movie to keep up with it, but once it does, it's exhilarating. At the same time, there is a vision here, a passing of the torch. There's something deeply stirring and almost primordial. It's just a totally incredible, ultimate action film.
Also on my list is I Am Love, a film by Luca Guadagnino, a director a lot of people know for his film Call Me By Your Name. Although personally, I think this film, which stars Tilda Swinton, is his best. Not only is it a film that sort of expands the idea of what cinema can do, when you think about it, cinema has 2 tools, sight and sound, and directors have to work within those. But Guadagnino as a director makes you smell things. He makes you taste the cooking. You can practically feel the skin and the grass in the lovemaking scenes. It's an incredibly rich experience. That's something he also brought to Call Me By Your Name, and I think he's a director who's really kind of expanding the vocabulary of what this medium can do.
Pretty strange that we keep running into each other.
Maybe it means something.
My number 2 movie of the decade is La La Land. I think it is, for me at least, quite simply the most joyful movie of the last 10 years. For me, it's just an absolutely indelible experience. This movie that is happy and sad at the same time. La La Land, for me, is just a movie of such incandescent vision and craftsmanship. Damien Chazelle made the rare movie that really does look back to the spirit of old Hollywood, but sees that through a lens that is very contemporary. He allows us to live in a magical movie landscape that is at once one of old Hollywood and new, a landscape of dreams and reality. All of that coexisting. That's the magic of La La Land.
I noticed that my top choice, Tree of Life, the Terrence Malick film, also appeared on Owen's list.
There are 2 ways through life. The way of nature and the way of grace.
This is a movie that, for me, really took the boldest chance of the last 10 years. Terrence Malick tells an incredibly personal story. He himself lost his younger brother, and the film is about someone trying to grapple with the idea of losing a sibling and how that unfairness relates to his idea of God, of faith, of there being some higher purpose in the world. And to sort of emphasize the importance of this whole inquiry, Terrence Malick includes a 16-minute sort of digression in which he retraces the entire creation of the universe, life. It's an incredibly kind of mind-altering way to elevate a really important and personal concern. I've sort of joked that you could do this with any of Terrence Malick's movies, but this is the one he does it in, and I just don't think that cinema can ever be the same afterwards.
Your life will flash by.
My number 1 film of the last 10 years is The Social Network.
I need to do something substantial in order to get the attention of the clubs.
Why?
Because they're exclusive and fun, and they lead to a better life.
It's such a momentous film about our time, about the energy, the digital energy that took over our time. It's about essentially the creation of social media. And in a sense, what The Social Network shows us is that what was being created with Facebook was a new way of communicating, a new way of talking to each other, a new way of living. And that this new way was created by people who were dysfunctional, who maybe couldn't communicate directly. That's kind of the metaphysic of social media. It's communicating indirectly, created by people who couldn't connect. That's what The Social Network captures. And that, I think, is what makes it, in the last 10 years, the movie of our time.